As the clock struck midnight, I found myself on a desolate road that seemed to stretch endlessly into the abyss. The night was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl in the distance. My car's headlights cut through the inky darkness, revealing gnarled trees that lined the road like silent sentinels of a forgotten time. The journey had begun innocently enough. I had been driving to visit a friend in a nearby town, relying on my GPS for guidance. But as I followed its instructions, I realized that I was no longer on a familiar route. The GPS screen, old and cracked, displayed cryptic directions that made no sense. Recalculating, it said repeatedly, as if it too were lost in this nightmarish maze. A feeling of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. The road seemed to twist and turn unpredictably, and every time I checked the GPS, it led me further into the heart of this desolation. Panic clawed at my chest, and I contemplated turning back, but the road behind me had vanished into obscurity, leaving only an endless expanse of darkness. The gnarled trees that lined the road now appeared as spectral apparitions, their branches reaching out as if trying to grab hold of my car. The air inside the vehicle grew heavy, and beads of sweat formed on my brow. I had entered a realm where the rules of reality no longer applied, a place where the ordinary had given way to the extraordinary. As I continued to drive deeper into the unknown, the minutes turned into hours, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone on this forsaken road. It was as though unseen eyes were watching my every move, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I had unwittingly entered a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. Just as panic began to claw at my chest, I spotted a figure on the roadside, thumb outstretched, desperately seeking a ride. My headlights illuminated her silhouette, revealing a woman with vacant eyes and disheveled hair. She wore a tattered dress that seemed out of place in the modern world, and her very presence sent a shiver down my spine. Hesitant but feeling sympathy for the woman, I pulled over to offer assistance. She approached the car slowly, her gaze never leaving mine. As she opened the passenger door and climbed inside, a chill enveloped the car, and the atmosphere grew even more unsettling. The woman said nothing, and her eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. I attempted to engage her in conversation, asking if she needed help or if she was lost. She responded with only incoherent muttering, her words a jumble of unintelligible sounds. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The woman's presence seemed to cast a pall over the car, and I could feel her gaze on me even as I focused on the road. Her vacant eyes held a depth of sorrow that chilled me to the bone. I continued to drive, my unease growing with each passing mile. The woman in the passenger seat never spoke, and her mutterings grew more disturbing. It was as though she was reciting an incantation, her words led in with an otherworldly resonance. As we journeyed deeper into the night, the woman's presence became increasingly ominous. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had invited something malevolent into my car, something that was not of this world. The road ahead seemed to stretch on endlessly, and I began to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake by offering her a ride. The journey continued in silence, the woman occasionally muttering unsettling phrases under her breath. Her words were a nonsensical jumble of sounds and syllables that sent a chill down my spine. I stole glances at her through the rearview mirror, and her face seemed to change with each passing moment. One moment she appeared as a young woman with a haunting beauty, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. The next, her visage twisted into that of a withered crone, her features contorted with malevolence. It was as though I was sharing my car with a shape-shifting specter, a creature that defied all logic and reason. As we approached a dimly lit tunnel, my heart began to race. The woman's mutterings grew louder, and the air inside the car felt charged with a palpable sense of dread. Just as we entered the tunnel, I glanced into the rearview mirror one final time, only to find that the woman had vanished from the back seat. Panic gripped me as I swerved the car, narrowly avoiding a collision with the tunnel wall. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. I searched every inch of the car, but there was no sign of the woman. It was as though she had simply ceased to exist, leaving me alone with the growing terror that I was not in control of my own destiny. I knew then that I was trapped in a nightmare, a waking dream from which there was no escape. The road ahead stretched on endlessly, and I had no choice but to continue driving, haunted by the memory of the mysterious hitchhiker who had disappeared into the shadows. Desperation gnawed at my sanity as I continued down the never-ending road. I reached for the radio in a feeble attempt to break the suffocating silence that had enveloped the car. But as I tuned the dial, the radio seemed to have a mind of its own. Static filled the airwaves, and the radio emitted a series of eerie, discordant tones. I fumbled with the controls, trying to regain control of the device, but it was as if it had become possessed by some malevolent force. The static grew louder, and I could hear faint whispers in the background, like voices from another world. I turned the radio off, but it refused to obey my commands. It cackled with static, and the voices grew more insistent, their words a garbled cacophony of sound. I strained to make out the words, but they seemed to shift and change, as though they were mocking me. Suddenly the voices became clearer, and I could hear them speaking my name. They whispered my deepest secrets, recounting memories and events that I had long buried in the recesses of my mind. It was as though the radio had become a conduit to my innermost fears and regrets. I tried to turn the radio off again, but it continued to play, the voices growing louder and more accusatory. Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized that I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, haunted by the ghosts of my past. The radio had become a relentless tormentor, a reminder of the sins and mistakes that I could never escape. As I drove on, the radio continued to play, its haunting voices a constant presence in the car. It was as though the road itself had become a conduit to the supernatural, a realm where my deepest fears had taken on a terrifying life of their own. Hours turned into an eternity as I drove deeper into the night. The road seemed to loop upon itself, leading me in endless circles through a desolate landscape. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was caught in a never-ending nightmare, a surreal realm where time had lost all meaning. I stopped at a gas station in a feeble attempt to find some semblance of normalcy, but what I encountered there only deepened my sense of dread. The gas station attendant was a ghostly figure, his features obscured by shadows. He stared blankly ahead, his eyes empty and soulless. I approached the counter and tried to engage him in conversation, but he did not acknowledge my presence. It was as though I was invisible to him, a mere specter passing through his world. I left the gas station in a state of bewilderment, my sense of isolation growing with each passing moment. Every exit I took from the gas station led me back to the same forsaken road. It was as though the landscape itself had become a labyrinth, a puzzle with no solution. The road stretched on endlessly, and I had no choice but to continue driving, my hope of escape fading with each passing mile. As I drove on, the night seemed to stretch into infinity. The darkness outside the car was absolute, and I felt as though I had entered a realm beyond time and space. The road ahead was an unending ribbon of asphalt, a path to nowhere that seemed to lead me deeper into the unknown. The weight of hopelessness pressed upon me, and I began to wonder if I had entered a realm beyond the realm of the living, a place where the rules of reality had ceased to apply. I was a prisoner of the night, condemned to drive endlessly through this surreal landscape with no hope of finding my way back to the world I once knew. Finally, my car sputtered to a halt, the engine dying in the oppressive silence. I stepped out of the car, trembling, and found myself in an unfamiliar landscape that defied the laws of reality. The world around me seemed to shift and warp, as though I had entered a dimension beyond human comprehension. The hitchhiker reappeared before me, her form shifting and changing like a mirage. She whispered in a voice that echoed with malevolence, revealing a dreadful truth. I was not alone in this nightmarish realm, and I could never escape. The road had claimed me, and I was now a prisoner of the supernatural, condemned to drive forever through the realms of the unknown. The hitchhiker spoke of a curse that bound me to this place, a curse that could never be broken. As her words echoed in my ears, I felt a sense of hopelessness unlike anything I had ever known. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, a realm where the ordinary had given way to the extraordinary, and there was no escape. The hitchhiker's form twisted and contorted, and I could see the faces of countless lost souls within her. They whispered their tales of woe, their voices a haunting chorus of despair. It was as though the road itself had become a gateway to the afterlife, a place where the spirits of the dead roamed freely. I knew then that I would never find my way back to the world I had known. I was a prisoner of the night, condemned to drive through this malevolent twilight zone, where my every fear had become a terrifying reality. As I stood there surrounded by the spectral figures of the hitchhiker and the lost souls, I realized that I had entered a realm beyond human understanding, a place where the boundaries of life and death had become blurred. There was no escape, no hope of returning to the world I had once known. I was now a permanent resident of the night, a denizen of the supernatural, and there was no turning back.